So today's presentation is going to look at a few aspects. We're going to have a quick touch on the current state of recycling processing across New South Wales. We're going to have a look at what the New South Wales government is doing at the moment to expand recycling processing capacity and how the New South Wales government is identifying and prioritising areas for improving resource recovery and how we can drive the resource recovery outcomes that we want in New South Wales through a range of policy measures and other measures such as grant funding. So I'm going to hand over to Zack Thomas now, who's going to have a bit of a chat about what New South Wales government is doing at the moment and the current state of processing in New South Wales. Thanks, mate.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, waste fans. As Michael said, I'm the manager of the Resource Recovery Infrastructure team for the EPA. I've worked in the environment sector since 1995, including a number of years with the Environment Agency in the UK, and I joined the EPA New South Wales in 2006. So, where are we now? In order for us to plan for the future and look at the infrastructure that we've got, and in order to decide what we need, we first need to get a baseline and understand where we are today. That includes not only the infrastructure itself, but also looking at the waste that we have and what we're doing with it. So, over the last 10 years, New South Wales recycling has doubled from 5.3 million tonnes in 2002-03 to 10.8 million tonnes in 10-11. That means our recycling rate has increased from 45 to 63% across the state. But we're still sending recyclable materials to landfill, and there are obviously opportunities for us to improve. So, why do we need more recycling infrastructure? Well, as I mentioned, there's opportunities for us to improve, and that means looking at, for example, food and garden waste. 40% of the red bin bins is food and garden waste that could be recycled. Dry recyclables account for 25% of red bin bins, and business recycling, over 50% of business material is still landfilled, and that's 50% of material that's recyclable, including plastic, paper, cardboard and garden organics. Now, the New South Wales 2021 targets are for us to be recycling 70% of municipal waste, 70% of commercial industrial and 80% of construction and demolition waste by 2021. Now, the Waste Less Recycle More programme, as you've heard this morning, is making big strides in attempting to do that, along with all of our partners in the industry and in council and the voluntary sector. And a big part of that from the Waste Less Recycle More programme has been the investment in infrastructure. Of the $171.5 million that's been awarded to the 325 projects, 40 million has gone to infrastructure, or is to go to infrastructure. And obviously this initiative is funded through the Waste Levy, which is the largest waste and recycling funding programme in Australia. So it's estimated that 870,000 tonnes will be diverted from landfill on completion of these projects. And based on the Centre for International Economics 2011 report to OEH, it is estimated that 0.46 jobs per 1,000 tonnes of domestic waste diverted from landfill and 0.33 jobs per 1,000 tonnes of C&I waste diverted from landfill, and we estimate that 340 jobs will be created as a result of these projects funded. So these projects have included, in the infrastructure space, $250 million infrastructure package, which has included the Organics Infrastructure Programme, community recycling centres, waste and recycling infrastructure for levy-paying communities, business recycling programmes and recycling innovation. Now, that includes, coming up, we have the Resource Recovery Facility Expansion Enhancement Grants, which will be opening for a second round in August, and the Major Resource Recovery Infrastructure Grants that have just recently been assessed for round 2 and should be announced soon. So some of the priorities that we're looking at for infrastructure through these programs are expanded or enhanced infrastructure for household and business waste, and project priorities including recovery of materials from sorted and unsorted household business waste, plastics, timber, paper, cardboard and consumer packaging, and also the processing and stabilisation of residual waste. I'm just going to pass on to Michael, who'll talk a bit more about where we go to from here and looking at some of the statistics and methodologies that we're going to have and that we're going to use in order to analyse what we're going to do with infrastructure in the future.
Thanks, Zack. So, as you can tell from these figures, we've already had some incredible outcomes in resource recovery achievements in New South Wales. Over about an 8-year period, we nearly doubled the volume of municipal household recycling. As waste generation continues to increase, it means it's not necessarily a double in the proportion of recycling, but in terms of volume, there was a nearly double the amount of recycling done, which of course means that there's nearly double the amount of recycling plant and equipment required. Similarly, there's been major increases in the amount of resource recovery in commercial waste. And as you can see, we've got some really ambitious stretch targets to achieve by 2021, aiming to achieve 70% in municipal waste recycling, 70% in commercial and industrial recycling, from a base level of 50% for 50 to 57% in 2010-11. So that's over 10 years, increasing by a further 20% of the total recycling proportion in New South Wales. That represents millions of tonnes of additional recycling, which of course means additional recycling infrastructure. It's really worth noting as well that every additional few percent takes more effort than the last because of the challenge of getting the more difficult to recycle materials. Once you've got the easy stuff out, you've got to start working on the hard stuff. We still send over 6 million tonnes of waste to landfill every year in New South Wales. This is filling up the available landfill space and a real opportunity for improved recycling. One thing that I find really interesting about these numbers is that we're seeing pretty similar numbers of pretty similar tonnages in around the 2 million tonne range from both the municipal sector, the commercial and industrial sector, and the construction and demolition sector. So while they're achieving different recycling rates, because of the different volumes of material generated, we're actually seeing similar amounts of waste to landfill from each, and similar opportunities, or opportunities right across all these sectors for improving resource recovery and getting some of these great resources out of landfill. In the development of the targets, we didn't just pick numbers that we liked, we didn't just pick round numbers that sounded good. There was actually a fair amount of work done to underpin these targets and to have a look at realistic but ambitious recycling numbers. For municipal waste, to achieve 70% recycling by 2021, it's estimated that there's around, there's estimated around 2.5 million tonnes of additional recycling required. For commercial waste, an additional 3 million tonnes of recycling required to meet these targets. To achieve these, we're going to need not just new infrastructure, but also new ways of collecting materials, new waste prevention methods, and a range of other strategies. For commercial and demolition waste, construction and demolition waste, around another 1 million tonnes of recycling infrastructure is required. To drill down into these numbers that were developed for the infrastructure, were developed for the waste strategy, we're now undertaking a new project to have a look at what infrastructure types are needed in different regions. To do this, we're having a look at where the infrastructure gaps are. And in order to identify those gaps, we really have to understand the current state of play. It's surprising, but there's not a single consolidated database anywhere in New South Wales that tells us where the recycling facilities are, what they're doing, how much they're processing, until now. This project is going to develop the most comprehensive listing of up-to-date resource recovery assets and waste assets, understanding both how much they're processing and how much additional capacity there is. One thing that we're going to be doing is mapping out these facilities across New South Wales and making those maps available so everyone can see where these waste and recycling facilities are and what they do. The way that we gather this data is largely from organisations such as those attending today. To find out where these facilities are and what they're doing, we need your help. We've already had around 100 organisations provide data. If you'd like to participate, we greatly appreciate it. You can download the slideshow presentation after the conference, or you can get in contact with me directly. I'm going to hand over to Zack now to finish off the presentation and talk a little bit about some of the challenges and assumptions required to model infrastructure gaps. Thanks, Zack.
So I've only got a couple of minutes to finish off here, so bear with me. In order to do an infrastructure needs analysis, there's a number of factors that we need to consider, and we need to think about what the future should look like. There's a number of variables that we need to take into consideration: generation rates, dealing with population and demographic changes, changes in per capita waste generation, energy usage, economics, fluctuation in prices of materials, scale and scalability, contractual arrangements between councils and waste service providers. We need to think about things like source separation versus mixed waste processing, higher order recycling versus energy from waste, diverse secondary markets that can add value in Australia versus low-grade commodity exports. Should we be getting into the space, as was talked about earlier by Vino, about raw material supplies? Should we be intervening in that market and interspersing our infrastructure with remanufacturing or pre-processing for remanufacturing? We also need to think about our soils and food security, as Jack talked about. So we need to understand all these drivers and adapt our policy and analyse technology towards it. And therefore we can have a look at how the government should invest and stimulate the market in the future to achieve these targets. What particular infrastructure and system solutions to achieve, and what mix of infrastructure we need. Should we let the market decide what it should look like? What's the role of regulation and federal harmonisation across those regulations? Some of these are policy issues, some of them are technology issues, but the aim will be to draft out some scenarios that encapsulate these issues and then go on to the community and seek consultation and feedback in order to get these situations right. So what we're looking at is, as I said, a number of scenarios: low, medium and high source separation, high mixed waste treatment versus low mixed waste treatment, and how that will play out, and what's the likelihood of those scenarios in Sydney Metro versus ERA or NRA and RRA regions. So we'll be modelling various scenarios. Though some of those models will look a bit like this, and we'll be working out the percentages and working out the types of infrastructure that can manage those different waste streams in the regions and across the country. Okay, this is my last one. So what we're trying to do, work towards, is not only managing diversion from waste from landfill, but also ensuring that it contributes to the circular economy and adds value whilst recovering valuable resources in both rural and metropolitan regions of New South Wales. And we want to create an industry to be even more proud of, an industry that's advanced, responsive, robust and sustainable, and a world leader for the people and environment of New South Wales. Thank you very much.